Hi, I'm Andy Villamarzo, and thank you for joining us for our next episode of the Coastal. And we are joined by another special guest here, the Daily Sun's sports editor, Patrick Obley. And thank you so much, Patrick, for coming on with us. And we're about at that midway point for most teams. Obviously, some teams have missed a game here or there because of bad weather. But what's new in the Sunshine State? And how's everything gone for you so far this high school football season?
It's interesting. Right when you started that introduction, it started storming outside.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, par for the course. But the good thing is, for the first time in a while, we don't have any Thursday night games. So we're in the clear as far as I'm concerned. But I probably just jinxed myself for tomorrow night. So
And Patrick here, for the folks out there that don't know, he covers South Sarasota, Charlotte County, and DeSoto County. Does a tremendous job, and not just covering football, he covers all sports. And definitely give him and the Daily Sun a follow and read up on their stuff. They do great work weekly. And Patrick, I'd be remiss if we didn't start off with probably I would say the most popular team in your area when it comes to knowing about state championships and getting there, and that is the Venice Indians, who are kind of in a weird spot right now. I'd say they're 2-2. A lot of people probably were trying to think where would they be at through about the midway point, because you had
Mhm.
those couple tough games that Armwood lost at the beginning. I think that was kind of a shocker to a lot of people, and then the Cocoa one I don't think was that could have been a toss
Right.
up, but then things have kind of come back right to where they should be, back to back wins here. So I mean, what's your thoughts on the Indians so far through 4 games?
Well, they're exactly where they were last year at this time. They were 2-2 after 4 games last year. I think you kind of hit on it. The Armwood game kind of woke them up a little bit. I don't think they knew Armwood was a good team. They knew Armwood was not going to be like the teams they had the couple of years before this year. They knew it was going to be a team that was kind of looking to get back into that state Final Four kind of territory, and they I don't know if they took them lightly. I wouldn't say that, but I think they were not ready for what Armwood brought. Armwood kind of treated that game. They might take issue with this, but it felt like they took it like a Super Bowl. They came in there, they were fired up, they were charged up from the first minute to the final buzzer, and they just took it to Venice. I don't think Venice was ready for that, and I think there's a little bit of a hangover going into Cocoa the next week. Although that's a road trip, and that's an ugly road trip going across Central
Yeah.
Florida right there, and they actually played pretty well in that Cocoa game. But Cocoa is Cocoa, and they took care of business. And I don't think they came out of that game feeling particularly bad about themselves. They were 0-2 at that point. Going down to Northwestern. Northwestern's a little bit. I don't know if you would call them down or not this year. They played a brutal schedule, but
Yeah.
it wasn't the same type of Northwestern team that they've seen before. And they went down there. They kind of took care of business in that, although the defense had some hiccups in that game, but they hung 63 points on Northwestern. And
Yeah.
as soon as you see that, I think Columbus last week only scored 24 on Northwestern. So as soon as you saw that, it was like, well, okay, I think they're probably going to be okay. And then this past week, River Ridge was completely outmatched. Was I would say that was I wouldn't call it a scrimmage for theirs, but they played a lot of people in that game, and they took care of business pretty easily. And it feels like the same exact Venice team they had last year. You get that feeling they are starting to put the transfer pieces together. Everybody's starting to build up that chemistry. You look at they have that weird 3-team district that they have to get through, which is ostensibly a championship game coming up
Yeah.
tomorrow night against Riverview. And I think they're pretty much right where they were last year. And I think they're probably going to be right there in the mix at the end of the year, all the same.
And we got to talk about that game against Riverview,
Mhm.
because obviously, and we're going to dive in a little deeper with your thoughts on the FHSA's initial rankings, but obviously Peacock, as We'll just say he's put his opinion out there of what his thoughts are, and in a way of saying they're outmatched by a team that's a little north of them, and we all know they got a big transfer over the offseason, and Charles Lester, who
Mm-hmm.
Florida State commit, and not sure if he's going to play in that game. I know he was in a walking boot.
50-50. Yeah, it's about
50.
50-50 right now. So we'll see.
I mean, this game though, not a lot of love lost. Obviously, you got guys who've been on both sides. I know Anthony Miller over there. He was over at Venice last year as a freshman. Now over at Riverview, and he's contributing with them. Kind of just what's kind of the feeling going into this game, because obviously a lot of bad blood on both sides, and Coach Peacock and Coach Smithers probably I don't know, that could probably be a pretty interesting handshake at the beginning at the end of the game.
They kind of jawed each other during the off season, and during the early part of the season. And that FHSAA ranking was just a gift from the heavens to John Peacock. You could tell immediately the first tweet that came out right afterwards. He's playing that up for all he possibly can. I think this Riverview team is a little bit different than the teams that Venice has seen in the past. It seems like their offense has got a lot going on with it. I think they're probably, if you ask someone on Venice, they're probably a little bit surprised at what Miller's doing. I think he was a backup quarterback at Venice. He goes over to Riverview. I think he's probably the quarterback of the future at Riverview too, but he's what he's doing at wide receiver for them, I think, has been an eye opener. And it's an interesting matchup because it's a little bit of strength on strength. The things that Riverview does in the passing game really aligns with the best part of what Venice does on defense. They've got two monster corners, obviously Charles Lester on one side if he plays, and they've got Dalen Platt on the other side, who's been, I think he's got a couple interceptions this year, and he's kind of relished that role on the other side of Lester, trying to play up to his level, and I think he has for the most part this year. So it'll probably come down to what kind of pressure can Venice put up front. They have not been kind of recording the levels of sacks and tackles for loss that past teams have done there at Venice, but I think they're starting to figure that out piece by piece. I think they probably still just have too much firepower though for Riverview in this game.
Yeah, and Venice, I mean, it seems like it's kind of like a quarterback factory, and I think I've joked with some people. I feel like a lot of teams in the Suncoast, they've inherited somebody who's played at Venice.
Yes.
I mean, Port Charlotte has Eli Manley. He was at Venice at one point. Miller, same thing. And then you get these quarterbacks who come to Venice who didn't actually grow through the system, and they become the starter. And that is no different this year with you got Jaden Glasser and Ryan Downs, coming from South Plantation, and Downs from IMG Academy. What's been your thoughts on these two guys before we jump over to another tough team in that Suncoast area?
I think Jaden Glasser's been a little bit under the radar this year, if that's possible. He had that one big game down at Miami Northwestern, and then he had a solid game here against River Ridge, which I don't know what all you could take from that game or not. I think it's been a learning curve for him, but he's clearly talented. He's got the ability as a dual threat quarterback in that system. They do an interesting thing at Venice, which they haven't done in a while. They've got Ryan Downs there as that kind of that guy they could bring in to get short yardage. He's a better running option of the two quarterbacks, and it's kind of neat to see Venice toy with this two quarterback thing. Not that they put Ryan Downs in there a lot, but it's a little wrinkle in their offense, which has been kind of a neat thing to see, and they use it well. If it's any kind of a short yardage situation, you can put Ryan Downs in there and he will get it. So. And that will be interesting too, since Downs is just a junior. They might actually have an incumbent quarterback next year, which is a very rare thing for them. You're talking about quarterbacks that have gone elsewhere from Venice. I think last year, Port Charlotte and Charlotte both had former Venice quarterbacks. And this year, let's see, Port Charlotte's got a former Venice quarterback. And of course, the Charlotte kid, Michael Valentino, went up to Cardinal Mooney. He's at Cardinal Mooney. So all throughout the area, there's there are
Wow.
former Venice quarterbacks doing great things for other teams. So.
Yeah, 3 or 4 different schools that have former Venice quarterbacks. Interesting to see how that kind of it's like the gift that keeps on giving almost, but all these schools are kind of reaping the benefit of it. And I guess we'll jump right into it. I mean, Port Charlotte, another team that has aspirations to go deep into the playoffs, maybe get to the state semis and beyond. 3-2 at this point. Obviously, started off the season with a tough matchup against Bishop Verot, a high-powered offense. They lost that game, and then they win 3 in a row. And then they just played Manatee, and that was a tough loss. But I mean, I think the solace they can take out of it is the rest of their schedule very winnable for the Pirates.
Right.
And they kind of finished 8-2 the rest of the way. But Patrick, your thoughts on this first half of the season for the Pirates and Jordan Ingman's group?
We were kind of kicking it around as a staff last night, kind of curious. Is it possible that there's a little bit of a panic mode going on with Port Charlotte right now, because you have a team who has now lost to the 2 best teams on their schedule. Like you're saying, I don't think there's any shame in losing to Bishop Verot. That's an extremely good football team, and Manatee obviously is undefeated and much improved over last year, even though they were good last year as well. I don't think they anticipated necessarily losing to Manatee though. So now you have this team that has lost to the 2 best teams on their schedule. They've smoked the other 3 teams that were much. I think the combined record of that group is something like 2-11. So there's not much you can take from that, even though that was 3 straight shutouts by large margins. They're in a situation with the latest FHSAA rankings where in their region they're already 7th, which is that's a little scary. That means they've lost their margin for error right there if they don't win their district. If they lose the game somewhere along the way, they might see themselves on the outside looking in on the region, which is kind of a lot of things still have to happen. Obviously, there's still a lot of football left to play, but they've kind of removed their margin for error here by maybe not finding a way to beat Manatee, which is that's a hard curve to grade a team on. He's like, oh, they didn't beat Manatee, they can't be in the playoffs. That's a terrible thing to say, but that's kind of the way the math is working out right now, which is ugly and unfortunate, but that's where they are right now. Like you're saying, though, in their district, they should be easily favored. Braden Rivers, their game tonight. When you look around the rest of that district, you've got Parish Community in there that's off to a good start, but Parish lost by 20 points to Lemon Bay earlier this year. So I don't know just what exactly Parish is going to bring into that game. It does feel like Port Charlotte is the class of that district.
And you mentioned they might be in a little bit of a panic because of being in that 7th. And this is a team that if anyone's paying attention to them, like on the state level, you got to look at this team as a very talented one, because you got Edgar Rutgers commit, you got Jamal Streeter, South Dakota commit. We talked about Manly. You obviously have that defense led by Myron Charles. This is a very good team. You look at it top to bottom, and when I saw them, I was very impressed at just how many athletes they have, and to think this might be in any kind of panic mode because they're in that 7th spot. Do you feel like just with everything they've had to go through the past year, Hurricane Ian, obviously the passing of Coach Norris, and then the first half, do you feel like that's kind of all contributed to kind of maybe this overall stress of the team?
I think this is a very senior dominated group they've got over there. They've been through a lot. They've come up through Pop Warner together. They've always been around each other. And as such, they've seen how Port Charlotte, the exception being last year, how just one little slip up on their schedule has bumped them out of the regional playoffs. during what was probably their freshman and sophomore years for a lot of these guys. So they know that that's in the back of their head. This is a really tight group. I think you probably saw that the other night. They after Hurricane Ian came through, it wiped out the weight room there at Port Charlotte. The high school was heavily damaged by that storm, and they did not have a weight room the rest of the year. They had to move all their weight equipment out to the tennis courts, and they would go out every day after school outside in the pouring rain sometimes, and they would lift weights out there on the tennis courts. And that created, they already had a brotherhood, but that really strengthened the bonds even more. And then what they went through this summer with Coach Norris passing away unexpectedly, the team really came together after that as well. And like you say, as far as the talent on the field, it's at every level. They've got it at the quarterback position. Eli Manley is a very good facilitator for them. The running backs, you mentioned Ed Guerrier, who's obviously a beast, but Ike Perry is right there alongside him as a junior, who filled in very admirably for Ed when Ed was out with a little hand injury earlier this year. They've got receivers all over the place. Jamal Streeter is, I think, really underrated around the state. He's a spectacular receiver. They've got the Besserell twins out there. They've got a kid named Dallas Lambert, who's a sophomore, who looks a whole lot like Alex Perry, who ended up going to Hawaii out of Port Charlotte a couple of years ago. He has all the same vibes and all the same height, all the same leaping ability. He can go up there and pull down those jump balls just like Alex did back in the day. So that's the offensive side. Defensive side, like you said, Myron Charles is right there in the middle of the defensive line. But they've got the Luther boys, Sam and Tyrell Luther, right up front. They're monsters. They're probably, statistically, I wouldn't know this for sure, but I think they're outproducing Myron right now on either side of him. Linebacker Grant LaBallister leads the team in tackles. He's everywhere on the field all the time. You saw Eric Bell come flying out, make a few hits, I'm sure. Incredible defensive back right there. So they've got a lot of stuff going for them. I think what they need to clean up is they do make mistakes, especially in the special teams lately. If they can just kind of clean up those mistakes, they're a team that can make a deep run in the postseason, kind of depending on where they end up in the regional standings.
Definitely agree. I think the team, and I've seen a lot of football around the state, and that's where it jumped out at me when you said, I feel like this team could compete against a lot of teams I've seen outside of obviously elite type, Shaman Madonna and IMG. Right. You're talking about a team that could make a run. Port Charlotte does have the horses. It's a matter of the computers, which we're going to talk about. The computers are going to decide a lot. Are they going to let them in? I mean, are these two losses going to impact them to the point where they somehow get pushed out? That would just be really unfortunate, but we will see. A team right now that's controlling their destiny, and they're not relying on computers. Heck, they really just rely on going out there Friday night and winning, and they've done it every Friday, is Lemon Bay. The Manta Rays, watch out. These guys are 5-0. They're not just doing it by winning by a score, even though I know that North Fort Myers game they did by a point, but recently just beating IMG Academy Blue 48-7. And this team, I mean, Lorenzo Marceri done a great job at quarterback. Caleb Hutcherson, he's been a guy on both sides for him. I mean, we got to talk up this team. I know they don't get a lot of love when you're talking about going around the state, but this team is undefeated, and they've looked great doing it.
I think a little bit of the underrated part that's coming in for Lemon Bay is a couple of years ago they went undefeated. It was before they really had that district set up for those Class 4A teams and lower. When they went to this new classification system, they ended up in the district, and they had to play a district schedule this past year and this year. But before that, they didn't have to play a district schedule, so they just kind of scheduled whoever they wanted, almost like an independent, going out there and finding opponents to play. They had a problem finding opponents to play, so their schedule was kind of weak. And they stormed through that schedule. They went 9-0, first time in school history. They went undefeated in the regular season, and they got beat up on during the first round of the playoffs. I want to say that was Clewiston that came in there and beat them. And I wonder sometimes if around the state, when they see a 5-0 Lima Bay right now, they kind of have that hangover from a couple of years ago when Lima Bay was, undefeated. People were kind of drinking the Kool-Aid on them a little bit, going, "Oh, that's a good team," because they were crushing people. And then of course, what happened to them in the first round of those playoffs. But this year, they're playing a decent schedule, and the North Fort Myers game is the one that really stands out to me, just because it's the one game on their schedule that was a tight game. They won it 34-33. That was a game where they had to come from behind twice. And at the end of that game, with about 4.5 minutes left, they had to kill the clock. And they did it absolutely methodically, even with North Fort Myers having timeouts. They just kept, I guess, like Hank Stram said, matriculating the ball down the field, not necessarily going for a score or anything, but just trying to kill that clock. And they did, which is, to me, that's a hallmark of a team that can make a playoff run, if it can go out there and do things like that. And you mentioned Lorenzo Marcere. The fun thing about him, he's 6'4", 205 pounds. He's prototypical quarterback. You look at him and go, that kid plays quarterback. He's got a strong arm. He's got an accurate arm. He's got a unique running ability. When they design runs for him, they're all up the middle. There's no bootleg. There's no getting around the end. There's nothing like that. It's always straight up the middle with him. And it's not even one of those quarterback draw things where they trick the defense and he sneaks through there. He just goes up the middle on dives, and he gets his 100 yards a game rushing to go with whatever yards passing. Their running backs, Landon Spanager, came back after being gone all last year. He's a state weightlifting champion 2 times over. He's a beast. Can't be stopped. He's maybe a bad comparison, but he has that Forrest Gump feeling about him. You stick the ball in his gut, and he just goes, and no one stops him. It's that kind of thing when Landon's got the ball. Joe Scott had 5 touchdowns against North Fort Myers. That kid, if he hits any kind of hole, if there's a hole there that he gets through, you're not going to catch him. He's going to go long. And he's learned how to catch the ball out of the backfield too this year, which has been scary. Teams can't catch up with him when he's out there in the route. So they've got all the pieces you want to see in a team to make some kind of run. Their unfortunate situation is they're in the same region with Bishop Verot. So it's one of those things where I think they could be there in the region final against a Bishop Verot, depending on how those rankings come out. But
right.
It's hard to say anyone's going to get past Bishop Verot. You can't take that for granted ever. But I do think they have the capability to finally win in that first round game, making a little bit more of a run than they have in years past.
Yeah, definitely region final. That would be,
that would be huge.
Yeah. Vikings, obviously, high-powered offense. Port Charlotte got a glimpse of that week 1. So Lemon Bay. But hey, if they could win a couple, that would definitely be a big feather in their cap. We got to talk about Northport. It's like I think about all these teams, and I'm like, Garen Bessler. I can't forget about his Bobcats. I mean, they won 3 games. We might question one of the games. I know you guys forgot that game, and I was seeing the tweets or the posts, whatever we want to call it, on X, formerly Twitter. But this Ambassadors Christian game, that was interesting. Just kind of seeing there was just enough kids getting out of the vans, and they play a game, and they just happen to win. I mean, but I think Northport will take the wins however they can get them, because it's been hard to come by for them in the past years here.
This is a program that has never had a winning season. When I looked back through it, they had never even started a season 2-1, let alone 3-1 as they are now. I don't know where a 3-game winning streak stands in the history of Northport. I don't think that's happened all that often either. it's one of those things where you just, you have that schedule and you got to play the games that are on your schedule, and, winning them is better than losing them.
Yeah.
So, the whole goal with Northport when they went independent like they did, that's something for people to understand, is if Northport stayed in the FHSAA these past 2 years, they would have been in with Venice. So that's not ideal if you're trying to build a program to go out there and have to play Venice and Riverview every year in your district. So Garen took his team independent so they can kind of build up the program a little bit. They had extremely low numbers a couple of years ago, and they needed to just kind of build the program, get that excitement back. Garen himself is a wonderful coach. He's very enthusiastic. He's always out there learning something new. It's been fun to watch him kind of grow into the role over the years. And finally, at Northport, they've got pieces. They've got an offensive line that you can run behind. They've got some playmakers at running back. It's Zeke Baez and Peter Kalfat at running back. They've got a couple good quarterbacks. Nick Pinto back there. He can throw any ball anywhere. They don't really rely on the passing game, obviously, because they're kind of I guess you'd probably call it a wing T offense. Is kind of what they're using right now. Gino DeBean has been a really good running quarterback for them. He kind of splits time in there at signal caller. Their defense is doing enough to get the job done. That's a very underrated group on that side of the ball. They're doing some good things there against these opponents. Their game last week against Gateway, I think that's the one game I saw that I was like, well, okay, they're building something nice there. It was a 29-15 win. They had to they fell behind to Gateway, and Gateway has, they don't have a great record, but they do have a decent defense. And they fell behind to Gateway, and they stayed patient. They stayed with their running game. They knew they would eventually wear down Gateway, and that's exactly what happened. Second half, they just blew past Gateway, just running the ball, continuing to pound it with Zeke Baez in there. And they pulled out, I think that was, I want to say it's like 21 unanswered points right there to win that game 29-15. So they've got a game down at LaBelle this week. We took a little bit of heat in our podcast because we're kind of laughing about that matchup. LaBelle's also an independent. We have no idea what LaBelle's got. We couldn't really preview that game very well just because of that. The one game on LaBelle's schedule that we could say, oh, we know that team was Bayshore, and they got beat, I think 48-14 by Bayshore. So I think that LaBelle game is kind of like a cross the Rubicon situation for them. If they can win that game, they can really start seriously thinking about a winning season for the first time in program history, and that's everything. Just getting to 5-5 or 6-4 at Northport this year, whether they stay independent going forward or if they go back into district play, this will be huge for the school. It'll be a big uplift for that program. It'll get the kids excited about playing football again and seeing that Garen is moving this team in the right direction. They're a lot of fun to cover. When you go out to their games, they're just they're fun to watch out there on the field. They're incredibly enthusiastic kids. They play with sound like an old man when I say stuff like this, but they play the game the right way. They get out there and they have a lot of fun.
Well, that's something I think kind of gets lost in high school sports a little bit. Will be on the recruiting and then all the transferring. Those are some things that sometimes if we stop and look at it for a second, it's almost like you might actually have a little bit of fun while you're out there too.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that I think miss sometimes. And a team that is trying to make it fun right now. Well, a couple teams. Obviously, finding wins has been tough for the Charlotte Fighting Tarpons and the DeSoto County Cowboys here. I mean, obviously, these two teams just trying to find something to kind of hold on to a season that's been tough for both of them. No wins. Just kind of talk about both of their seasons right now. And I know Coach Metzer, I got to meet him over the Suncoast Media Day, and obviously he had some high hopes, but I mean, things just haven't gone well for Charlotte here so far.
It's been interesting coming into the year with Charlotte. Their numbers were a little bit down, not the kind of numbers that you normally see with a Charlotte program, which means they were a little bit thin going into that first game of the year. And sure enough, they had an unbelievable amount of injuries against Dunbar in their first game. And one of those injuries was to their only quarterback on the roster, freshman Logan Flaherty. He went down in that game with I think it was a collarbone injury. So he's been out all season after that second pass attempt against
Oh,
Dunbar. So they've had to rotate in basically 4 emergency quarterbacks, kids that have never played the position before, and their second game of the year was against Port Charlotte, their big rival. They didn't really realize until Tuesday the situation they were in with Logan Flaherty. So they threw Brady Hall back there at quarterback, who's never played the position in his life. He's a very talented athlete, but he'd never played the position in his life, and he only had basically 2.5 practices to do anything back there. So there was no hope of
uh,
anything happening against Port Charlotte in that game. They continued to suffer injuries every game this year. This past game against Fort Myers, they lost their one of their starting linebackers, Jaden Palmer, and they lost Dior Evans, who's a electric return man for them. Could be a really good running back / wide receiver as well. He went down with a hand injury in that game. I don't think he's going to be playing anytime soon here. So they're still dealing with that. But the good news for them, that's the thing that Corey keeps saying, and he's exactly right about. Their whole season remains in front of them instead of what's happened behind them here. They've got the first round of district. I don't know if you've seen Charlotte's district, but Riverdale at 1-4 is the only team with a win in that district, I think. So it's it's a district with a lot of problems, and I think Charlotte. I might be wrong about this, but I think Charlotte might be the highest rated of those 4 teams in that district right now. And they've got it because of their schedule. They played a brutal schedule. Logan Flaherty's coming back this week. I think what we saw happening these past few weeks with Charlotte has been a closed playbook. Now that Logan Flaherty's back, they might open that playbook back up again and start using some plays they haven't been able to really use during the course of the season so far. People forget their kickoff classic against Mariner. They beat Mariner 41-17 with Logan back there quarterback. So there is ability there. And you had the feeling, even though Fort Myers did what they did last week, 44-18 win, you started seeing everyone coming back last week. They were probably as healthy last week as they've been, even though they lost 2 more players. So you could see it coming together. You could see everyone starting to play the position they're supposed to play as opposed to filling in somewhere else. The offensive line was as healthy as it's been all year. The receivers were back playing wide receiver. Trenton Curlis is a sophomore who's going to be one of the best receivers on the Southwest Coast by the time he's a senior. Brady Hall is a spectacular athlete at wide receiver for them as well. Their running game has kind of been waiting for an offensive line to show back up. They've got Joshua Brown back there, who's the home run threat, and Jamari Vaughn, who's just kind of a move the sticks kind of running back. So they've got that going for them. So of all the teams in the area, when it comes to their districts, it's you can kind of look at Venice and say they're going to win their district. They only have to beat Riverview basically. Sarasota's 0-5 in that district. So you can see Venice easily winning their district. You can see Port Charlotte, they're the best team in that district, so they should win it. And weirdly enough, they're Charlotte. Charlotte is also probably the best team in their district and could probably win it. And it would be wild to see a Charlotte team in the postseason for the very simple reason that the first team they would probably see is Venice in the postseason if that happens. So it's I think they would take that. They would be happy to be district champions, and they would merrily go into whatever game in the playoffs they end up playing. So
absolutely. Well, I'm gonna going ahead with the rankings. We're gonna touch on this because kind of end of the show here, and I know these were, I don't know, either well received, or you looked at them and you were left doing this kind of thing, like, hmm, weird. I don't know how this team's here or there,
Right.
but you saw the rankings last year. You took your first look at them this year, and you mentioned it all throughout where these teams. I mean, Charlotte, that doesn't have a win, is ahead of a team that has a win that they're in the same district with. What was your thoughts when you were looking through it?
Well, the eye opener is seeing Lima Bay sitting there as the best team in our region. They were 73, which I always just look at the state overall rankings as opposed to the regional rankings. It seems that for some reason that means more to me looking at the overall rankings. But yeah, Lima Bay was our highest rated team, and as good as Lima Bay is, it's really hard to squint and see them beating a Port Charlotte or obviously a Venice. And
Yeah.
Venice was third of our area teams. They were behind both Lima Bay and Port Charlotte, and they weren't just a little bit behind Lima Bay and Port Charlotte. They were way behind Lima Bay and Port Charlotte, which
What?
that was one of the more mind-blowing things I've seen. That it made it very obvious how much the FHSAA just bases things on wins and losses as opposed to strength of schedule, who's played who. Because I don't think, other than this River Ridge game, I don't think you can look at Venice's schedule and say they played cupcakes. They most
No.
certainly didn't. So that's been eye opening. That when you look at the other baseline you have for these rankings is the rankings that have been kind of building all season long. They have a strength of schedule component in their rankings, and when you see what Max Prep does, everything's kind of back in order. You have Venice as our number one team, Port Charlotte after them, and then Lima Bay well behind. There's a gap there between Venice and Port Charlotte to the next team, and that's the way it should be. I think that's when you get to the eye test, that's what you see. You see that's the pecking order you see in that group. So I think by the end of the year you get more data points in the system and things start kind of shaking out where everybody should be. But it's got to be a spooky thing for Port Charlotte in particular to see where they're sitting here in the very first rankings. They're clearly a better team than where they're sitting in the rankings. Seventh in their own region, when I would say, you've got Golden Gate in that region. You got to give them props. They've had the best season so far in that region. Naples is right behind them. I think their only loss was Golden Gate.
Yeah.
So those are your 1-2 teams, and I have a hard time seeing anybody else ahead of Port Charlotte at that point. I think that's 1, 2, 3. It's Golden Gate, Naples, and then Port Charlotte. But they're down there at 7th. Fort Myers is at 8th, and I don't know how much of a gap there is from 8 to 9. But if that's a tight gap, that gets really spooky for Port Charlotte if they drop a game here the rest of the way. So they definitely, I think they're definitely thinking about winning district more than anything else. They don't want it in the computer's hands in the first place, but they've really got to be aware of that going forward, that they need to just take care of business and quite possibly win out.
Yeah, and I like the word you use a couple times, spooky, because we are coming up on October, so it is going to be spooky. Yeah, I mean, we do. It is going to get a little spooky for every team that is kind of relying on computer rankings over just trying to win the games on the field. But I mean, obviously, the goal is to win every Friday night, and for these Suncoast teams, each one of them could possibly make the playoffs, other than Northport obviously is an independent, but the teams we talked about all have a shot. And
I guess we didn't talk about DeSoto. DeSoto's in Lima Bay's district. They played tonight or tomorrow night. That's probably going to eliminate DeSoto. They're winless right now. They've got a new coach in there. They had massive graduation losses. I think they had maybe 4 experienced players back, maybe 4 starters back from last year's team that won the district last year, and they've been winless. They had their best effort of the year against Bayshore last week. It was a 50-21 loss. They're finding their pieces. They're so young that it's really going to be about next year for them. They're going to try to find the guys that they need going forward and be ready to ready to attack the district next year, whatever district they end up in.
Well, we know Jeff Lee's trying to kind of right the ship there. They're trying to, make strides here week to week, and should see DeSoto County kind of get better as the season moves along. But Patrick, thank you so much for coming on with us here on our latest episode of the Coastal, and we'd love to have you come back on come playoff time, and we could kind of circle back on some of these teams that we do think are going to be in the playoffs.
Absolutely. I think, like I said, I could see 4 teams from this area out of 5 actually make the postseason here. So.
All right. Well, that is Patrick Obley with the Daily Sun. He's the sports editor over there. Give them a follow. They do great work. And once again, thank you for coming on with us here in our latest episode of the Coastal. Join us next week as we will bring on another guest, John Santucci with the USA Today Network, and we're going to dive in a little bit around the state and more on those FHSA rankings that some of us have our head, scratching our heads on, but also seeing how this will shake out.